right? Hello everybody, how are you doing? I hope that everything is going fine for you and that everybody around you, your family, your friends are well too, right? We're going to keep on with the current lesson. Hello everybody. It's a pleasure having you. Yeah, tired. Yeah, we're all tired, right? I think that this rhythm, like, is a difficult one to take and to keep in. Hello. It's a pleasure having you, right? So, what I propose you to do is that today I will eventually finish or complete the lesson on development for the next hour. Just saying a few more things about China, okay, and just concluding on China and its development policies, and that means that tomorrow maybe we could have a collaborative class on BB Collaborate, so as to make maybe a document study, and if you have questions, and we can summarize all this. The reason is that next week I won't be able to teach any class because it will be the recruitment week for the new candidates for the OIB, the students in Troisième willing to join this wonderful international section. We have to oral them through video, and that will happen on from Tuesday to Friday. So on Wednesday and Thursday I won't be able to teach you classes. Maybe I will leave you documents on Moodle, but I'm not even sure. So I think it would be great if tomorrow we could meet on the collaborative class. So maybe we make a summary all that we've said, all that we've done so far. Maybe see one or two documents and practice a bit, if you're okay with that. Okay, so I will let you know. I will send you a message for this. But this is the program for this week. Okay, now, people. I'm going to spend 5 or 10 more minutes on China, right? That will be a way for me to remind you of the things we've done so far and the specific choices made by the Chinese government since the 1970s and how it has worked and the achievements of this policy. That's for the next 10 minutes approximately, I hope so. And then for a bit more than half an hour, I will present you with the choices made by another emerging country, which is Brazil. And Brazil has made another choice, okay, to help its population develop. And especially, Brazil has targeted the poorest population. And this is what I'm going to explain you today. And once this is done, this lesson on development will be over, right? We have defined the development indicators. How do you calculate development? What is the interest of doing this? What is the role of doing this? Who does it? Secondly, we've seen the link between population and development, right? With the demographic transition model. With Japan, Mali. We've also discussed the question of population with China's one-child policy, why it was done, and the problems it has created. And finally, how can countries develop, and how can countries and governments encourage development? Okay, this is the structure of the lesson. So today, it's going to be the last example with the end of China. At the end of China as an example, of course. I'm not sure it's close to be the end of China at all. The end of China as a country that has achieved a lot in terms of development. And the ambiguous case of Brazil, because for Brazil it's a bit more ambiguous in terms of results. Okay? Good. So, if you remember, this is more or less where we stopped. That's exactly where we stopped last week, okay? So if you have like notes or whatever, this is where we stopped. I've told you that since the 1970s, China and the Communist government of China, which is an authoritarian government, which is a very centralized government, has taken 3 major decisions to increase the development standards in China and to accelerate the process of development in China. The first decision all decisions actually date back to either the end of the 1970s or the very beginning of the 1980s. So it was all done just after the death of Mao Zedong, the communist leader of China, the man who made the revolution, the communist revolution in China. When he died, changes came. First change, the one-child policy. Okay, from 1979 officially to the year 2000, and the definitive abolition, suppression, removal of this one-child policy in 2016. We said it has been very efficient in reducing natality. It really stopped the fast increase of the Chinese population, but it has created a problem of an aging population. The second decision was called the 4 modernization, and it was putting the focus on industry, agriculture, science and technology, and the military sector, which I've not discussed a lot. And the aim was to make China a country in capacity to propose a more efficient industry, a more efficient agriculture, innovative production with science and technology. One example of how far it has worked: China has now space engines and space rockets and can have its own satellites, launch its own satellites. There are Chinese spacemen, they're called the taikonnauts. So this science and technology modernization has worked well. And finally, and that's my third point, China was willing to attract something called foreign direct investments. FDI, foreign direct investments. Why is this? Because China, to develop, was in need to attract foreign money, foreign investors. And this is where we stopped last week. If you look at this map, the first decision were about coastal cities. And the strategy was very clear. The Chinese government had a very clear strategy. China should attract foreign companies. And the aim was to have an industrial production, like manufacturing, so manufacturing electronics, cars, toys, textile, whatever manufacturing you can do, industry. Have it produced in China and then immediately export it. So it's like, a double movement. Movement number 1, foreign money comes in, foreign investments come in. They bring money to China, they bring capital to China, they build factories in China, they train the workers in China. They bring the knowledge of what you call the know-how, the technology and the skills. Goods are being produced or assembled or manufactured in China and then sent back to whatever country wants to buy them, so re-export it or export it. This was the Chinese strategy. To do this, China created the SEZ, the Special Economic Zones. And let's read together an article about these special economic zones. The text we're about to read is, here we go. Right, here we are. Is a text by it's a text that you can find on the website of an institution we've already talked about, which is called the World Bank. Just maybe you need a reminder on the World Bank. It's an institution which was created in 1945, 44-45, and it's part of the United Nations. Okay, so it's an intergovernmental organization. It's an official one associated to the United Nations. At first, it was called the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So the bird, all right, Banque Internationale de Reconstruction et pour la Reconstruction et le Développement in French. Okay. And so actually it's easier to remember in French because it makes bird. Now it's called the World Bank, and the aim is clear. The World Bank identifies needs for countries, sectors or infrastructures in which countries should invest. And when these countries don't have the money to invest, then the World Bank can lend money for these investments to be made. Okay? So, of course, the World Bank knows a lot about the type of strategies that countries have to develop. And so that's a very, it's a very reliable source. You remember this question, how useful is the document? So the document is quite useful because it dates back to 2009. So it's approximately 30 years after the special economic zones were created. Okay? Good. Remember, if you have any question, right, please do not hesitate to ask. It's very important that you can ask question in case you have a problem on this. Anyway, let's read this. China's remarkable process of economic growth through globalization began in 1978 with the implementation of the open door policy. And the open door policy permitted a massive wave of investments and rapid expansion of China's infrastructure. Open door policy. It means that you open the door to foreign companies, foreign enterprises, foreign firms, foreign banks, to some extent, to invest in China. Before this, China was more close to foreign investments. Okay, under Mao, there were very few foreign investments made in China. From the 1980s, special economic zones, SEZ, played an instrumental, a crucial role in the integration of China to the global economy and its economic development. Their setting aimed at attracting foreign investments and technology, as I've just told you. Provide employment, because the Chinese workers would be employed in these companies. Utilize Chinese and imported resources. And support capital formation. It means that if you want to develop a Chinese industry, you need the Chinese company to have the capital. And the capital is all the money you invest to create a company. But this money China didn't have, so it had to come from somewhere. If you prefer, it's exactly as if you create, you want to create your own company, you want to create your own business, okay? You don't have the money for that, but you need to buy the place, you want to, for example, you want to open a store, you want to sell something. So you need to buy the premises, you need to buy the place. You need to buy the raw materials, you need to buy, I don't know, like so machines or computers, whatever. You don't have the money. You have only two possibilities. Either you go to your banker and you say, please lend me money. You can trust me. I'm very good at business and so on. So please lend me money. It may work. Or what you can do is create, a kind of structure where people will give you money. Maybe they will buy shares. They will buy stocks. They will buy parts of your company. And that will bring you capital. This is exactly what you call capital formation. It means when you gather the money you need to start a business, okay? And China wanted to do this, but they wanted to do this on a national scale. It was not just about one company. The aim was to do that on a wide scale, so as to boost Chinese economic development. Okay? So the output, the result, the production, okay, output is what you produce. It's what you put out, so it's the final production, was to be exported to foreign markets, underlining that special economic zones were part of an export-oriented strategy that has characterized many Asian economies since World War II. So it's just underlining the fact that economic development in Asia, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and China, and Vietnam today, or Cambodia, is based on this. Producing things so as to export them. The aim of China at first was not for Chinese people to buy the Chinese-made goods, but more for the world to buy the Chinese-made goods. And you can see how well it has worked. So, the following incentives, that means a way to encourage companies to come. Labor. The ability to use the Chinese vast pool of low-cost labor. As the salaries, as the wages in China were very low, and that's something everybody knows, but it has changed since then. It's not the case anymore. Chinese workers are not so cheap today, okay? But at that time, the cost, the wages of Chinese workers were low. So foreign firms have also the right to hire and fire labor, which was different from the then prevailing Chinese lifetime system of public or collective firms. What does that mean? Before in China, when you were employed in a company, you would keep your job whatever happened. It was a communist system, so you should not be unemployed. Now the foreign companies could come and they could do something, that they could take workers, hire workers, and fire them, lay them off. Land use. The special economic zones were physically developed as specific entities with infrastructures and an access to a container port complex. So all special economic zones were in connection with a port to export. Okay? And be shipped to foreign markets. Finally, the last line, tax incentives. Special economic zones offered reduced corporate income tax. Companies that would invest in these zones would pay either no tax or very few taxes, very limited taxes. Okay? And so the first SEZs were established, that's the last paragraph on the text, they were established in proximity to Hong Kong, in the city, for example, of Shenzhen, in proximity of Macau, in Zhuhai, and in the proximity of Taiwan with Shantou and Xiamen. And their location was aimed at attracting overseas Chinese capital. Money that was coming from the Chinese community in Taiwan, the Chinese community in Hong Kong, or the Chinese community established in the rest of Asia. Okay? Is that clear? Maybe I should summarize. That was China's strategy. We are a poor... Okay, can I be a bit caricatural, if you're okay with that? I know it's a bit more complicated than this, but in the late 1970s, at the end of the 1970s, China was still a poor country, and the people in China were poor compared to the rest of the world and compared to the industrialized countries. The Chinese authorities said, okay, we need to reduce this poverty and we need to maximize the capacities of the Chinese economic system. How can we do this? We need to attract people from abroad who know better. Companies from Japan, from Taiwan, from the USA, from Europe, from the industrialized world, who already know how to create wealth and to improve production. To do this, we're going to create specific zones. Here, they can come and use the cheap labor force, people who will not cost much. They will be able to install their companies by the sea so they can export more easily. And they will be able to pay very few taxes, because that's, of course, something that companies love when they don't have to pay much tax on their benefits. Okay? That was the government strategy. Let me show you of the SEZ. Let me show you how it has worked in terms of landscape. Let me present you with Shenzhen. Sorry, I should have left the map for you to see better. Okay, right. I'm sorry for this. Let's do that. Okay. Right. Okay. In this region, you have Hong Kong, okay? And Hong Kong at that time was in the south of China, okay? So I don't know if I can actually show it to you, but maybe I have a map with names. I'm sorry. If you look at this map, you can see that in the south of China, okay, you've got a large circle and three smaller circles inside. This is where Hong Kong was. And at that time, Hong Kong was British. Okay, Hong Kong stopped being British only in 1997. And so the aim of the Chinese authority was to say, if we create an SEZ next to Hong Kong, as Hong Kong was a very rich city compared to the rest of China, the rich people, the wealthy companies in Hong Kong will invest in this SEZ. And this is how they created Shenzhen. Okay, and here we are. This is what it looks like. Top photograph at the top. This is Shenzhen in 1980. This is Shenzhen when the first before the first SEZ was opened. It was mostly a fisherman village. It was a traditional village. It had 10,000 inhabitants. It had 10,000 inhabitants in 1980. If you want a comparison, it's half the size of Olivet's population. Okay, Olivet has something like 20,000 inhabitants. In Shenzhen, you had only 10,000. Okay, look at the bottom picture. That's the same city 40 years later. This is Shenzhen today, or actually 5 years ago. That's exactly the same place, okay? You can recognize the bay, but that's globally all that you can recognize, because now the city of Shenzhen is 10 million inhabitants. And this city really started as an SEZ, I would say an SEZ only. Why? Because as you can see, it's by the sea, and you can see very easily, I don't know if you can see that on the bottom picture, maybe I should show you more precisely, but if you look at the bottom picture today, right, you can see that, look at this, you can see that activities associated to exportation have developed in these buildings, in these skyscrapers, in these high buildings, which look a lot like Manhattan or any financial district. It's what you call a central business district. That's something we'll study next year. Okay, it's in première. We study the CBD in première. In these places, you've got activities like a banking activity, a lot of companies that make trade, international trade, and so on. And so just the picture shows you that clearly China, and especially the coastal city of China, the city by the sea, have mostly benefited from these huge economic boom and development of industrial and commercial activities. Okay, right, once again, 40 years ago, today. I am not discussing now. That's something we will discuss next year. Next year we study the city of Xiamen, which is another SEZ, which started as another SEZ. There are a lot of problems created by this, as you can guess, overpopulation and environmental problems and so on. I'm not saying it's perfect, right? I'm not saying, wow, that's dreamland. I'm just saying, wow, economic development has really been a success with this policy. Okay? Right. So, in conclusion on this, on this question of China's development policies and how it has worked. Another document that I may have shown you already, but I want to show you again. Sorry, I'm just getting it. That's it. This document. I think that's something I've already displayed and used last week. And that's my conclusion on China. And then we move on to Brazil because we've got only half an hour left. But I will be shorter on Brazil. It's just a way to show you another possible strategy that countries have. As you can see, in China, okay, you've got the three sectors of the economy. Just a reminder for all of you, I'm sure you know this, but it's just to make sure. The primary sector is everything related to agriculture, fishing, exploiting the forestry, and the mining activity. The primary sector means you take the raw materials. So agriculture, mines, forest, fish, that's it. As you can see, it means that if you look at the graph, it means that in 1952, that's how you should read the graph. In 1952, more than half of the Chinese GDP was produced in the primary sector, mostly agriculture. And if you look at the secondary sector, okay, secondary sector is industry, all that you transform. So you take raw materials and you transform them into another good. That's secondary sector. It represented only 20% of the Chinese GDP in 1952. Look at the date. If you look at the chart and you look at the date, 1986 or 1984, okay, you can see that you have like you've got a moment when the Chinese industry bounced back. And that's the moment when the special economic zones really started to be efficient. So in the 1980s and 1990s, there was a boom in the Chinese industry. But if you look at the last line, there was also a boom in the tertiary sector. Why? Because the tertiary sector is the services, including commerce, including trade. And so it means that, of course, as in the 1980s, and that's very easy to see, look at this. You can look at 1980, 1982, and suddenly you've got this boom in the tertiary sector. What is it? It's China starting to export massively all the goods that had been transformed in the special economic zones. And so clearly, this development strategy by China has been a success. Why? Because China is now, that's my conclusion on China, I swear. China is now the second GDP in the world, second only to the USA. And as I've told you when I introduced this, there are chances that in the next 10 years, maybe before, or maybe a bit later, but in the next 10 years, China will produce more GDP than the USA and become the first economic power in the world. Secondly, it is estimated that 800 million Chinese people, 800 million Chinese people have gotten out of poverty thanks to this Chinese strategy. Okay? It means that you still have 400 or 500 million people in China meeting poverty problems, because remember, the Chinese population is 1.4 billion almost. But clearly, in history, never had so many people being taken out of poverty in such a short lapse of time, a short span of time. So whatever you think of the Chinese government, whatever you think of the Chinese strategy, whatever you think of the Chinese the effects of this Chinese strategy in terms of environment, in terms of politics, in terms of happiness, whatever. In pure terms of economic development and the capacity to eradicate poverty, China has been very efficient. Okay? Right. Other question on China, and I will take the last, I've got 25 minutes to speak of Brazil now, but is it clear for you what we've said about China? Please, if it's not, once again, do not hesitate and ask questions, right? But tomorrow we'll make a common, not debate, but a common discussion on these matters in the collaborative class. So if you want to ask question at that moment, it's fine too. Okay, good. Final example, Brazil. So now it's going to be a bit different because the situation in Brazil is different in many ways. And I won't develop as much on Brazil as I have on China. What they have in common, sorry, I'm just looking for the Brazil's documents, right? So just a few seconds. Okay. Let's start from here, and maybe maybe a map first, just for everybody to remember what Brazil looks like. Okay. So Brazil, of course, is a Latin American country. I'm sure you don't need a map of Latin America to remember where Brazil is. I hope so. Sorry, I hadn't seen your question. 800 million since the 1980s for China. Okay, 800 million of people have gotten out of poverty in the last 40 years approximately. Okay, so here we go. This is a map. So sorry, it's in French because it's the best one I've found, the clearest one I've found. It's a map of an indicator you know very well. This indicator is called the Human Development Index. Okay, so maybe I don't need to define it once more. I hope you remember what it's all about. And this one is very interesting because it's not a map on a national scale. I mean, it's on a national scale, of course. It shows all of Brazil. But it's the HDI. It's the HDI from approximately 15 or 13 years ago by district, or something you call municip. Okay, which is a kind of local division, like a local district, local. It may look a bit like a mix between a canton and département, if you want. Or okay, that's it. So it's a Brazilian division of the state. And of course, when you have the HDI on a local scale, then you can see the huge gap in Brazil. And that was Brazil's problem, and it's still Brazil's problem. Let me show you something. How should you read this map? You should read the map by, for example, focusing on the south of Brazil. If you look at the south of Brazil, you can see that almost everywhere, or at least in many places, the HDI was more than 0.76. What does that mean? Then in many places in southern Brazil, the Human Development Index was above the world average. And that regions in Brazil, I'm thinking of São Paulo or Rio de Janeiro, the major cities and metropolises, were almost as developed as cities from, the UK or Germany or France or, right. I mean, maybe a bit less developed, but globally the population living there would have more or less the same HDI than in developed countries. But the situation was totally different and still is totally different when you look at other places in Brazil, especially two regions, the northeast of Brazil, Nordeste, as it's called, the northeast of Brazil that you can see on the map. That's the yellow and paler colors, and extreme Amazon, right, on the far west. It's the far west of Brazil, and you can see it when you go westwards. You can see that you had these pockets, places of, look at this, very low development. Very low is less than 0.5. That means that Brazil still has regions where the standards of development on the one hand are similar to Western Europe, similar to the United States, similar to the developed Asian countries, rather in the south. And on the contrary, places in Brazil where the human development is the equivalent of what you can find in sub-Saharan Africa or in the least developed countries in Asia. So for Brazil, you had this question of huge inequalities. Okay? How did they decide to solve this? First, Brazil used the development indicators that we've already seen. And these are a few indicators that you know already, which are called, sorry, I should get rid of this. I'm sorry, I need to pick up some more documents. I'm sorry for this, just a few seconds. You can't really include that many documents in the software, so that's the reason why I have to pick some more. Here we go. Perfect. Brilliant. Formidable. Here we are. Well, what a sexy and attractive document it is, right? Okay, so sorry for this. I know it looks like, very austere and so on, but at least it's very clear. You remember we started studying China. In at the end of the 1970s and early 80s. So I've decided to start at the same moment so we can establish a few comparisons between China and Brazil. And I think tomorrow, this is what we will do. We will try to work on a comparison between China and Brazil and maybe compare their current situation, what's happening today. Look at this. 40 years ago, Brazil faced strong development issues. The life expectancy at birth was only 62. And you can guess that was due to a lot of children dying. When you have a high child mortality or precocious mortality, the life expectancy average decreases because it's an average. So if you have a lot of death in the young age, the life expectancy is lower. So look at this. The life expectancy in Brazil was only 62. And the central column also says a lot. The mean years of schooling were only 2.6, whereas the expected years were 9.9. What does that mean? Listen to me. What does that mean? That Brazilian kids were supposed to be schooled for 10 years. 9.9, no, 10 years. So globally, you can expect that they would go to school from 6 to 16, okay? Like, the primary and early secondary school. This is what was expected. But the reality, the mean years of schooling, is that most kids actually went to school for only 2 years and a half. And so it means that the literacy rate, the skills of the population were low. And as the skills of the population were low, you can see the next column, their national income per capita, how much money they had for one person, was less than $10,000 a year. It means approximately $800 a month. Okay? That means that a lot of people in Brazil were poor, were living below poverty level. And let me show you another document to prove it. Among the various development indicators that exist, there is one which is very useful. I've just mentioned it so far, but not really explained it. It's called the Gini index or Gini coefficient. Simple definition. The Gini index is an index of inequalities. The higher and the closer to 1 the index, the Gini index, the more inequalities between the richest and the poorest you have. So when the Gini index is low or close to 0, it means that the country has very few inequalities. Okay? When the Gini index is high or closer to 1, it means that the country has a lot of inequalities. Right? And so you can see that Brazil is a very unequal country. Okay? That one major problem for Brazil was that in many regions you had strong inequalities, and one way to measure, one way to reduce these inequalities that was chosen by the government, was to reduce the poorest part of the population. If you want to reduce inequalities, there are two ways. Okay? Oh, actually 3 ways. The first way is, let's call it, it's a joke, right? But it's the communist way, like you make sure that no one is really very rich and that all the poor people increase their standards of living. And it's like a perfect equality. That would mean index Gini 0. Okay? So you reduce the amount of rich people by taxes and so on. Second possibility, the Chinese way. You don't really want to reduce inequalities. You just want everybody to be richer. That's what China has done. The poorest people in China have become much richer, but the rich people have also been much richer. Final possibility, you help the poorest people and you give them money. And this is exactly, and so you expect them to have higher standards of living and reduce inequalities. This is exactly what Brazil has done with a policy called Bolsa Familia. And here we go for a short extract from a much longer article about how Bolsa Familia is working. I need just to include the document in the software, and that's fine. Here we go. Right. This article is perfect. It dates back to 2013. It starts by the description of the living condition of a woman and her family in Brazil. So, as one of the poorest residents in the poorest county of Brazil or municipality of Brazil, Life has always been a struggle for Maria Eunice Aves. The room of her adobe home leaks during the storm season, and vermin pose a constant threat to the health of her 10 children. There is so little money to go around, the family often goes hungry. So, it's almost I'm sorry for using this word because I know poverty is never a cliche, right? But, it reads really like the stereotype of what we call poverty and its effects. And when I say stereotype, there's nothing negative. It's more like the typical description of poverty. She has a poor home. The roof is adobe, so it means it's poor material. It's not very solid, but it leaks during the storm season, so it does not even offer correct shelter. It's not very protected. There is vermin, so it means that it's very unhealthy. It's a filthy place. She's got 10 children, so not only is she poor, but she apparently has not used birth control, and that may reveal possibly, a lack of education, a lack of, when I say education, I mean, learning how to control birth. Maybe. There's no judgment, okay? I'm not saying, wow, she's poor. Wow, why did she why would she have 10 children? You have 10 children. Either you need them as a helping hand, or you don't know how to control birth. And that may be the sign of a lack of education, which is not surprising in a country where you have a low average of schooling, right? There is so little money that the family often goes hungry. So, a lack of money. For most of her 40 years, so she's an adult, right? She's not like starting in life. She's been living like this all her life. Survival depended on farinha, the yellowish flour from the manioc root. So it's not very, it's a basic food, right? It's just for survival, right? In wealthy cities like Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, this is a powdery side dish. Like it's, in the rich city, people eat this like, when they have not much time or whatever, and generally it's not much appreciated. But for Avis and her other disadvantaged family in Belagua, Maranhão, it was until recently the only staple that got them through the hard times. Today, however, the government has thrown them another lifeline, a cash handout known as Bolsa Familia, that is paid on condition children go to school and get vaccinated. Each month, Avis receives 250 reais. That's approximately, to give you an example, that's approximately 70 euros. 70 euros a month. This sum is not nearly enough to end all her problems, but for the first time in her life, she has a regular income. It's been 10 years, so 10 years in 2013, so it's been since 2003. Since 2003, when Brazil's former president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva made Bolsa Familia a pillar of the country's social welfare strategy. And since then, poverty relief projects like this have spread around the globe. What is the basics of Bolsa Familia? The basics is trust the families. Poor families should be given money directly by the state so that they can take care of their own kin, on their own families. But as you've seen, there was a condition. Two conditions. if you want to receive the state money, your kids have to go to school. If you want to receive the state money, your kids have to be vaccinated. Why? Because when you calculate the Human Development Index, you calculate the life expectancy, and one way to increase life expectancy is to reduce child mortality. So by having the kids, getting the kids vaccinated, then of course you will reduce child mortality. And we also know that in the HDI, the amount of schooling, how long you go to school, is another indicator. Look at this. My bad. If you look at this chart and you look at the central column, you can see that the mean years of schooling started increasing, especially in the 1990s, but that since the 2000, right, there has been another increase. At the end of the 1990s, kids would go to school for mostly 4 years and a half. Now, they tend to go to school for more than 7 years. This has been an effect, not only of this, but this has partly been an effect of the Bolsa Familia. If poor families want to receive money from the state, if they want to have this financial aid by the state, the state will check. Okay, it's not like, oh, we give you money and we trust you for sending your kids to school. No. We check that your kids are being schooled. We check that your kids are being vaccinated. And so then if you fulfill these conditions, then you will get the state's money. Also, look at this. There has been some effect on the life expectancy, right? Clearly, vaccination existed right before the Bolsa Familia. It's just that it made vaccination much more common among the families, especially the poorest families, right? And you can see that life expectancy has actually increased in Brazil, but that the increase started before the Bolsa Familia. But if you look at this, since the Bolsa Familia, Brazil has gained 4 more years of life expectancy. So clearly, it seems to be a different strategy from China. Why? Because in China, that's my conclusion for today. And if you're okay with that, we'll be back on this tomorrow for a comparative approach and some kind of summary on the two approaches. Which, remember, I have never said these were the only strategies used by countries, okay? I'm not saying Brazil is developing only through Bolsa Familia, and I'm not saying China is developing only through the special economic zones, right? I'm just saying these are examples. I mean, it does not explain everything, of course. We don't have the time to explain everything. They're just possibilities of development, possible strategies of development. But if you look at this, you can see that in China, it was the state, okay, that controlled all the process. Like, we tell you what to do, we create the special economic zone, we force you to have only one kid, okay? In Brazil, it's a bit different. It's the state saying, okay, we provide the money and we'll check if your kids go to school. But for example, once they have the money, the families are free to use them, okay? The state control is about the conditions. Are your kids at school? Have they been vaccinated? But how the families will use the money is their own choice, okay? And most of the time, it's used for homes, housing and food and education, right? So, I'm going to stop here because there was plenty of information today, so I will leave you some time to, digest all this. we go back on this tomorrow. And if you're okay with that, we will meet at 1:45. I think I've told you 1:45 tomorrow. And on BB Collab. But I will send you a message on Pronote for everybody to be there. So if you can pass the message possibly to some people, because I can see there were only like 20-ish people today, which is fine. But I think tomorrow it could be useful if more people were connected, so we could summarize all this, because maybe some people watch this later, and possibly I know that some people watch this type of video later in the day or at some other moments. But tomorrow I would like to have a common meeting with all of you on BB Collab, so we can conclude on the lesson, make sure everything is clear, maybe draw together or create together some summary document, and then of course you will have a full lesson posted on Moodle. And as you know, I still have evaluation to hand you, so I will send them to you at the end of the week or beginning of next week, and I will certainly give you something else to do on this specific question. So tomorrow, conclusion on this, and trying to see what strategy seems to be the most relevant according to you, and what could be the problems, of course, created by such strategies. Okay? Right? Are we okay with all this? Right. So I've seen your question. So a few questions. Sorry, I'm just checking them. They have not appeared on my chat on the phone, so now I can see them. So I'm going to answer all the question as a conclusion. First question: are the vaccine free, or they have to pay it with the Bolsa Familia? No. You've got free medical program. Okay? And that includes vaccination. Secondly, if there are less children there, the population increases. Absolutely. That's one major problem, Jews. But in the meantime, natality is decreasing too in Brazil. So it's, stage 3 of the demographic transition, which means that now natality in Brazil is also declining. So it's fine. So I've answered your question globally. So vaccines, no. Families can have free vaccination programs. And natality is also declining in Brazil. I may show you tomorrow the demographic transition in Brazil to prove it. Okay? That's it. Okay? And regarding the documents, I will try. I've got a busy day. I've got plenty of classes today and virtual meetings. So I will try to put this on Moodle, yes, like a full PDF with both China and Brazil before tomorrow. Okay? We're okay with that? Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming to this morning class. Enjoy the rest of your day and possibly the other classes you have. And so see you tomorrow on BB Collab. I'll send a message on Pronote for everybody to know this. Okay? Take great care of yourself, people. Make sure you stay safe and